nice to welcome you to our final session. Obviously, what we've been trying to do is to achieve a position where you see all the basics. We don't necessarily go into absolute details on absolute everything, but in a funny sort of way, the way I would put it, you actually have a fair idea of what you don't know. You know more or less what you could know, and the sort of things that will be very useful for you if you decide to take up beekeeping. Some of you may feel, well, actually, I'd never realized it was quite as involved as this. And, you know, it's really interesting. It's really nice, but I'm not sure it's for me. Other people will think, well, it is for me, but perhaps not yet. But at least now at the end of the course, you can actually take an informed decision of what's the very best for you. So, session 6. The end of term. So, we'll just run through this. We don't expect you to know everything that we've covered instantly. There are people who spend their whole lives studying beekeeping, and you know, you just had six interesting evenings. But certainly what does happen is when you actually come to handle the bees and go into the hives, all this sort of thing does seem to fall into place much more easily and naturally than just in a presentation on a screen. And we've even dispelled a few myths. And actually at the end, hopefully we'll have plenty of time. There'll be plenty of time for questions. And also, of course, there are lots of things to think about, you know, whether we'll be able to do a practical course, you know, Boris permitting, and how we're going to manage things in this COVID era as we move into the spring. So it's what bees are going to actually bring back to the hive. Products of the hive. You can make some useful things, do some great things with beeswax, as you can see in the pictures there. Harvesting your crop. How are you going to extract your honey? You can see there's an extractor there. And we're just covering a little bit preparing for winter. And so we're starting, what are bees bringing back to the hive? And obviously, generally speaking, it's simply called forage. Bees see a world which is rather different from ours because they see certain wavelengths that we actually can't see. And so if we have a look here, on the left is a flower as we would see it, and that's how it is as a bee would see it. And the flowers have evolved to make themselves attractive to bees and to really try and steer them in and pollinate them. And to do that, obviously, they also provide nectar as well as the pollen as a bribe to get the bees and other insects into the flower in order to achieve pollination. I mean, now this is an amazing picture. Under ultraviolet light, this is what another flower looks like. This would be how a bee sees it, which is absolutely amazing compared to how we would normally see it. And believe it or not, the flowers emit a rather weak electrical signal, and bees, as they move their wings across each other, create a certain electrical charge, which can get to quite high voltages as they flip from flower to flower. And after a bee has visited a flower, the flower changes to emitting a positive electrical charge. And this demonstrates to the bees that, you know, that there's been a bee has gone there, and that they've sucked up the nectar, and so it's probably not a useful waste of a useful use of energy to go and have a look at it. Better to go elsewhere if they've got some choice. Whoops, sorry, I'm just trying to move this on and it's a little bit reluctant. Oh, here we go, we can move on. And then the flowers actually recharge with nectar, and the electrical charge changes again back to negative, and it becomes interesting to the bees again, and on we go. Different flowers actually, some flowers are very quick to recharge their nectaries with nectar, and some somewhat slower. And obviously from the point of view of a bee or a beekeeper, you want them to recharge as quickly as possible. And borage flower, which is a very nice flower that you can grow in your own garden, and actually is to a limited extent grown as a field crop, recharges within 30 seconds or so, which is amazing. And here's some borage, a very interested looking bee, lovely picture. And you can see the bee is flying in, picking up that negative charge, and it's going to pick up a nice load of nectar, possibly some pollen, and hopefully pollinate the flower as well. So what do they all forage? What's the total list? Obviously there's nectar, and then there's pollen, although that does look very pale on my screen for some reason. All right, this is most odd. Oh, all of a sudden, yeah. Well, propolis, we've come across before. You probably remember that great sticky glue that they use, and you could store on their back legs in flight. And it's got lots of useful uses within the hive. And they bring in water. And water is important in the hive for different purposes at different times of the year. That in the summer, it's used as a way of cooling the inside of the hive during very, very hot weather. And now, at the moment, the bees do need some water, because if they've got stores which they want to utilize, it's an advantage to be able to lute it down with a little bit of water. And and they're foraging over a remarkable area. You know, we say the classic distance that they fly is perhaps 3 miles, but that could be up to 16 square miles. If there's a good source of food or forage out there, they will, if they've found it, they will travel to it. And flowers have developed immense number of very subtle signals which they can send to bees and other insects. And the humble forget-me-not, which you probably are familiar from your garden, that if we have a look at, they once they're actually pollinated, they change color. We perhaps wouldn't notice it, but if you have a look here, the centers turn white. And can you see here the centers are very white, and this is what the bees can see with their eyes, their compound eyes, and they know that you know the nectaries aren't going to be charged up with nectar anymore. They don't need to be, because the flowers have been pollinated. So what do our bees require and need from their food? Well, energy, isn't it? So this is the thing they need every day. They've got to have the fuel to do all the tasks which they do, both outside the hive and in the hive. And so they collect their nectar, and then they've got to be able to store it, because obviously over the winter there aren't going to be many flowers, and for the colony to survive over the winter, that they've got to have a way of storing it as honey. And they also store other things, particularly fats, what have you, in their bodies, in their fat bodies that we discussed in the winter bees. There's this particular very rich chemical called vitellogelin, which is a particularly important source for them during the winter. And of course, they need proteins, just as we do. And that's really more importantly for when they're brood rearing, to have you know, good sources of proteins, which obviously is the pollen. And if you know that you see pollen being brought in by your bees, it's a good indicator that the queen is laying. And although it's very early in the year now, it's been quite mild over the last few days, and certainly we were looking at our apiary bees this morning, and most of the hives were bringing in pollen, and that's a good indicator, not a certainty, that the queen is laying. So your nectar is a plant secretion, and it's derived from starches. And we're going to talk about something else, which is a little bit strange. And you'll think, well, this is odd. Honeydew, what's that? It's a type of melon, isn't it? But in fact, another source of honey for the bees, not necessarily terribly important in this country, but in certain areas, it's very, very important. If you were in the Black Forest area of Germany, it's a local delicacy, which honeydew honey, which what happens is that aphids feed on the particularly the pine trees, and when they've actually processed this and eaten what they want, they secrete a little droplet from the end of their bodies, which is sugar rich, and the bees will actually collect this, and it's sugar rich, and they will bring it back and make honey from it. It's slightly more complicated because when it's these little droplets lie on the pine needles and what have you, they then get worked on by a particular fungal mycelium as well, which breaks it down a bit, and it produces the honey, which, as I say, sells for huge prices and is regarded as a local delicacy. And I must admit, someone gave me some once and said, oh, try this. Tell me what you think the overriding taste is. And it was one of those situations where you think, oh, no, you know, they've got a very subtle palate, and I won't be able to work out what it is that they're tasting. And it was actually tasted very, very strongly of licorice, believe it or not. And so honeydew honey makes a great deal of money. It's less of importance in this country, but you should perhaps know of it. And this is just some aphids actually being farmed by ants in this case, and it does show this little droplet of sugary liquid coming out of its bottom, which is the source of the sucrose. So this is some honeydew honey. But as I say, it's less important in this country. And so the honey is providing the bees with carbohydrate. Obviously the pollen, it's the protein. And the nectar, the amount of sucrose, the amount of sugar varies from plant to plant, and also from season to season, particularly if it's very dry or very wet, it can vary. And but the water content is substantial. And so when the bees forage, they use their own the invertase, this enzyme from the hypopharyngeal glands, which is added by the foraging bees, and they bring it back to the hive in their honey stomach in the crop that we talked about earlier. And when they arrive, they wait patiently for it to be taken from them by the house bees. And interestingly, there is a mechanism here at work that when the house bees test the nectar that they're bringing back, that obviously some bees are bringing back nectar which is more concentrated, which is more sugar rich than others. And the house bees always give priority to the ones that are bringing back sugar rich nectar. So if a bee is endlessly finding, it always seems to be having long waits to unload, it does actually tell it that, yes, you know, you may well be bringing back this nectar in good faith, but there are other bees on a slightly different crop which are bringing back something, you know, much better. And the invertase, this enzyme, breaks down the sucrose, which is what's called a disaccharides. In other words, it's two simpler sugars joined together into two monosaccharides, fructose and glucose. And they've got to then reduce the moisture content, the water content, down to about 17–19% before they can seal it over and use it for stores for the winter. And because it's going to be used as their winter food. And obviously, we're going to show some pictures in a moment of how they actually reduce down that water content. So obviously our foraging bees transfer the nectar to the house bees when they go to and the house bees add invertase and put the nectar into the cells for storage. And so here you can see the transfer of nectar from a forager to a house bee, and they go into this. It goes into the cells, and really the cell structure is, in engineering terms, remarkably efficient and effective as a way of working with wax, which is obviously quite a soft, malleable material, to give it the structural strength to stand up to the load which it's going to carry, and it's ergonomically extremely efficient use of the space. And I was told the story that I think it was actually in Victorian times, an eminent mathematician worked out the actual perfect design of all the angles in the cells, and when he checked it against what it was there was just a slight discrepancy, and he thought, well, the bees have done really well. They've almost got to the scientific perfection, and he then went back and checked all his work, and he actually found he'd got it slightly wrong and the bees were right in the first place. And so you can see the center of the cells on one side align with the three-way junctions of cells on the other, and the bottom of each cell is slightly bowl-shaped. And you can see it's got a slight upward tilt as well, which means it's less likely that honey, although it's pretty viscous, is less likely to run out. And here's a rather nice view looking down into a cell. So the magic moment comes, so that the bees have got to work down the water level. And they do this, that first of all, they take some nectar and they take it up on their tongue, and they can actually sort of strop their tongue in and out. It's got a very wide surface area, and this actually facilitates the evaporation of the water. And there will be a fair amount of fanning associated with this in the hive, and this helps to speed up the evaporation. And you can see here, this is a shallow frame. We've talked about these. This is what you'll almost certainly use in your boxes above the queen excluder, where you're going to have your honey. And you can see here, as we've talked about before, down here, they haven't quite reached the level when they're satisfied with it. But up here, it's been sealed over. This is just a lovely layer of pure wax. You can see that down here, that they've started but haven't quite finally finished sealing some of the cells, and eventually the magic moment will come when that whole frame is completely sealed on both sides. When it is, it's likely that it will weigh perhaps 2 pounds or so, just under, probably a little bit. So and when you pick one out and weigh it in your hands, that's a nice feeling. So if we think about our pollen for a minute, so that's our protein source. And it's really important in the production of the brood food. And the old name for brood food, the slightly Victorian, slightly twee name, is bee bread. It's not bread at all, of course, but it was just to give the idea it was their staple. And the pollen, that if they want to store it over the winter, they mix it with a little bit of honey and then put it in the cells, and they will always have a certain amount of pollen stored, although fresh pollen is nutritionally that little bit better than pollen that's been stored for a really quite a long time. And as you remember, they collect it on the body hairs, then they pass it back to the rear legs, where it goes on those spiky little hairs. They get called, rather misleadingly, pollen baskets, the corbiculae, which is just the Latin for a basket. And it means it's an ergonomic way of transporting it in flight. And that then goes back and it gets put into the cells by the foragers and is processed by the house bees. And, you know, they might need up to 50 kilograms. So that's 100 pounds. That's nearly, you know, in the old styles, it's getting on for 100 weight of pollen might get used over a season. Lovely picture. You can see the very substantial pollen loads. And just at the moment, most of the pollen that's being brought in, it's coming in from, say, crocus and snowdrop and certain amount of salix and other things. And but most of the pollen loads are quite small at the moment. And just a few bees that are finding a really good source and coming back heavy laden. And it's really nice to see when it is. The pollen, of course, tends to be slightly different colours, although in the spring it does seem to be an awful lot of yellow pollen. And here, believe it or not, you can see this flower here, and you can see its little anther there, and you can actually see it's got some very blue pollen. And some pollens do have these very distinctive colours, and you can therefore identify the plant from the pollen. But there's an awful lot, as I was saying, of yellow ones in the spring, and vast numbers of whitey grey, white. And but if you get into it, there's a very nice book called The Pollen Loads of the Honeybee by Dorothy Hodges, which Stu mentioned. It was, I think, her PhD thesis working on this. And if you really get into it, you can have a look at pollens under a microscope. And again, the external structure, the exene, is very characteristic, and you can really work out what your bees are bringing back. And this is a chart of some of the commoner pollens which bees bring back. I can't tell you which ones are which, but you know, there's subtle changes in colour across a number of different species of plant. And here we have some pollen that's been stored. Obviously there's some nectar in there. It's not sealed, and you can see there's pollen here, and it's got that slightly glossy appearance because a little bit of honey gets mixed with it, and it just helps with making it malleable and pack in nicely and to store nicely. And there you can see this is actually a tray which goes under your hive, and you can literally sell pollen and commercially, and there's quite a market for it in health food shops, and in certain areas, in certain countries, you know, it's a big item. As the bees go into the hive, they rub against a fixture which tends to knock some but not all of the pollen off, and it falls down into these trays. And I always remember one of our bee inspectors, Adam Vavers, who is retired now but was very active locally. He spent some years out in Canada, where he was commercially beekeeping, and he was saying that, you know, you go to these trays to take out the pollen, and he said it was always a bit fraught because quite often the local snakes used to climb up the back and get into those, and so you'd open it and there'd be a damn great snake in there. I think most of them were quite benign and not poisonous, but I think there was always the worry that a small percentage of them were actually poisonous. But it was enough to give you a bit of a funny turn, I think, when you pulled out the trays. So our old friend propolis, that sticky goo that we talked about, and again it gets transported on the rear legs in the same way. Although I always personally have this concern that where it's so sticky, it must be quite difficult to manage, and it must be quite difficult to get it off. but they obviously deal with it wonderfully well. And you can see it here. You can see with my mouse that there's a nice lot of propolis, and obviously it has several uses in the hive. They like to fill up any little gaps in the hive, act as a sealant, and also it does have certain antibiotic qualities, and the cells that they're going to lay the next generation of eggs in, the hive bees actually polish the cells with it. It's almost a sort of disinfectant before they put the new baby in. And as I say, it has antibacterial properties which people like to make use of. So this is some comb, and these are cut back a bit so that you can see. And obviously these are the cells, and you can see the eggs. They start sitting up nice and straight, and gradually they fall over, and you've got some larvae there. Lovely, healthy looking larvae. You can see their segmentation. They're pearly white, and they're lying in their little puddle of food. But you can see that here the cells are quite glossy and shiny, and that's where they've actually been polished with some propolis. And believe it or not, Stradivarius, when he made his world famous violins, he used to put up to, I think, 17 or 18 levels of different varnish onto his Stradivariuses, or Stradivarii, whichever they would be called, and that he varied the constituents in each layer of varnish to achieve the different tones that he wanted to achieve. And one of the things he used to put in his varnishes was actually propolis and water. That goes back in the honey stomach. And fun enough, it's not usually stored, although sometimes they will put it on the top bars. And but not in broad general terms, it's not stored. And so at this time of year, it's being used particularly to dilute the stored honey when they need to utilize it. As although our bees can get out, there's not a lot of nectar for them at the moment, and so they've had to. And we'll talk about fondant. You remember someone, was it Anne, asked about fondant earlier on, and Paul pointed out, well, different people do different things, but I'll talk about fondant in a little bit. It's also used as a coolant to control the temperature within the hive, and by evaporating it and fanning, that if it's getting very, very hot, they can maintain homeostasis, which is just to keep the temperature within the hive at the appropriate levels. So they might need a couple of pints of water a day, so they've got to bring them all back. So this is a nice little pond, and you can see the bees collecting water. Can you see that one's pumping there? That is actually, she rather is sucking it up, taking on board a good load. It's funny. We were talking about fanning earlier, and you can see here these are on the alighting board just outside the hive, but fanning can go on inside the hive as well, and they're actually creating an air current to help regulate the temperature within the hive. And you probably remember when we looked before, we've seen bees fanning, and their bottoms were down, and you could see a little line there where they were revealing their Nasanov glands, which produces a pheromone that says this is home, this is where you should be. But you can see these aren't doing that, they're just fanning, and it's all to do with temperature regulation. So communication. So obviously we've heard quite a lot about pheromones in the hive, and that obviously a lot of the information that that needs to paths within the hive is achieved through various pheromones. But obviously when the bees fly out, what they've got to be able to do is to direct other bees to where they're beginning to find a source of forage. And there are a couple of main dances. And the first one, the easy dance, if you like, which says there's something great and it's very close. And this is the circle dance. So you can see it's just going round like this. And basically that is saying there's something good and it's very close. Just go out and find it. It's perhaps within 100 yards and you should be able to find it. But then over 100 yards, obviously, the difficulty is that if it's just going to be by pure chance that they do discover it, it will be a very inefficient system. So they need a dance which gives more information. And this is the waggle dance. Some of you know was discovered by and described by Carl von Frisch, the great German entomologist. And they can give a sense of distance, or if you like, the not quite time, it's more the energy that is needed to get there. So if they were flying into a strong headwind, they would be doing more waggles than if they'd got a strong tailwind. And so they can give an idea of distance. And that's just an example of one thing that's been worked out. And if we have a look at the bee in the center, you can see it's going around there doing its little dance. The others are watching. It's obviously, there's no point in it dancing if it can't communicate. And so that's that. So, oh no, we're going on again, sorry. But what we have to say, and we probably said this before, is that one of the things you've got to be a little bit cautious of, that some of the material you'll come across is no doubt well-intentioned, but actually it's not necessarily correct. And certainly we've had people say, well, you know, it doesn't really matter about sort of classes and what have you. It's all on YouTube, and your heart sings because there's some fairly bizarre stuff out there, which, you know, may mislead you. This is a BBC program with a couple of eminent BBC people, Hive Alive, and here's a good example about even the bee can get it wrong.
He has just arrived back and is telling the others about a brand new source of nectar that's just coming on stream. Looking at the waggle dance, it seems the bee is telling us that the new supply is 1.2 kilometers away, about 22 degrees west of due north.
And actually what they were saying there was totally wrong, that it's nothing to do with the compass, north, south, east and west. It's about the position of the sun in the sky at that time. And the bees can navigate by their relationship to the sun. And fun enough, it doesn't matter if it's a cloudy day because their compound eye can perceive polarized light. And you probably remember when you've had dark glasses with a Polaroid, you know, you see those funny patterns in the windscreen of your car and what have you. And so the bees can perceive it. They know exactly where the sun is, even if they can't see it because of cloud. And so this is an example. If you imagine our plants over here and the sun's up here, and this is the sort of dance that the bee really does. So you can see what their dance, in fact, is the angle between the sun and the source. So the flower is at 90 degrees to the sun's position as it is at the moment, or as I last saw it. and the waggles are telling the sort of distance you've got to go. And one of the things is, some of you may think, well, I don't know, I just thought that beekeeping was having a box of bees at the bottom of the garden. I didn't realize that it was, you know, or as fun as it is, but perhaps time consuming. And something you can really do, which is really important and encourage your friends to, is to grow plants in your garden or wherever that actually are good for the pollinators, not just honeybees, although I'm heavily biased on the subject. But and so obviously now at the moment we might have these early flowers, winter flowering honeysuckle, snowdrop, crocus, some hazel and some willows around. And then gradually there are more willows, there'll be the blackthorn out, dandelions. Never underestimate the importance of dandelions. They're a really great source of nectar and pollen for bees. So every time you dig one out of your lawn, you know, feel mildly embarrassed that you're not being very ecological, although it may improve your lawn. And gradually, obviously, you'll have all these trees that and all the other sources. And of course, for a lot of you, you'll also have the background of people's gardens. I just point out, we mentioned this, the June gap, whereas our early flow tends to be really nice and good. And it varies a little bit, obviously, on the year, but it's not unlikely that in June, for 2 or 3 weeks, there is suddenly a real dearth of forage. And so, you know, you have to be aware of that. And if, say, you've just been given a little swarm of bees and you think, oh, I've put them into the hive and, you know, it's summer, they should do really well. But actually, believe it or not, bees can starve to death in June, believe it or not, even in the country. And one of the things which really amazed me, that when I first started keeping bees, it was in a terraced garden of a terraced house in South London. And, you know, we did, I think, pretty well there. And one of the things I couldn't understand was when we moved our hives down to Somerset, when we moved down in the 1970s, I couldn't understand for the first 2 or 3 years why I wasn't doing nearly as well with honey yields as I had in the back garden of a terraced house in South London. And it's dawned on me after about 2 or 3 years, it wasn't that I was doing anything wrong. It's just the way of modern agriculture, particularly in a dairy area. It's the green desert. There aren't an awful lot of flowers. There aren't an awful lot of plants, nectar producing plants. And the reason I was getting so much less honey than I had in London was just the fact there just wasn't the forage for the bees. And it came as a bit of a shock, to be honest. And in the autumn, obviously there's heather, willow herb, and others, and some people will take their hives off to the moors where there's lots of heather and get some lovely heather honey. So you can get all sorts of lists of good plants for bees. The RHS is, like the Royal Horticultural Society, it is a very good source of information. And here are some. This is produced by the Rosie Bee Company. And again, it tells you the sort of plants which are particularly good for honeybees and bumblebees and solitary bees. And, you know, you might like to think, well, perhaps I'm going to slightly alter the planting in my back garden and encourage my friends to do so as well. Here's a lovely picture, obviously something that's going on at the moment, a lovely snowdrop and a bee, and this early snowdrop pollen is a wonderful source of pollen, and you can see that they've got something on their back leg there. And often they're quite small, the loads, and my bees, I watch them every day when they're flying, and just at the moment the pollen loads are quite small, just because there isn't a huge amount out there yet. And there's a crocus again, and a bee having a thoroughly good time. Then the blackthorn comes out, and so it goes on. There's a field of dandelions. As I say, never underestimate a dandelion, and be racked with guilt where every time you take one out of your lawn, because it's a really good plant for pollinators. If we were really sensible, we'd be growing it as a field crop, and you know, the pollinators would be having a wonderful time. Something you may well see, it does vary from area to area, is oilseed rape. These days, an awful lot of it is winter sown. The reason for that is that it's in the spring that it actually flowers, and early summer. And the reason is, if you do that, it's less likely to get attacked by the flea beetle. And so an awful lot of it these days is winter sown and flowers early in the year. And you can get, you know, particularly as it's grown in large fields of it, you can get an awful lot of honey from it. It's a rather sort of white, insipid looking honey, and it has a quite strong brassica aftertaste. And it has significance for you as beekeepers, because it sets incredibly quickly. And if you don't get it out of the hive, it will be set in the frames and you won't get it out. And I mean, the bees will utilize it, but you know, it's if you feel you'd like a few jars of honey, you've got to be quick. Then field beans is another source, which is really handy. And so it's a matter of finding out, you know, who in your area is growing field beans. And then obviously all the fruit trees. I mean, my experience where I live, which is at Pilton near Shepton Mallet, is that my bees are at North Wootton, is that the early spring flow is a good one. And but by the time you get to the June gap, the best of the year is over for the bees. The lime trees are then good, and the brambles out, but it's not that there's a real cracker of a crop later on in the year. And here's the lime. Never underrate the importance and significance of limes for Tilia cordata. It's a small leaf lime. If you really want to do a good turn in the best Boy Scout fashion, plant some lime tree, preferably Tilia cordata, which is a small leaf lime, and it produces some lovely nectar. Classically, where I am, it comes out about the third week in June, and it marks the end of the June gap. And I'm always pleased when it comes out, and if it's nice and warm, it can give very good nectar flows, and you get some lovely honey from it. And I think here we're on some bramble. And one of the things you will notice that occasionally when you go to the shops, it will actually say this honey jar is you know, it's all apple honey, or it's all this honey or that honey. And that's actually what it means, is 75% should be from one source. And in this country, it's not easy to achieve that. There are some exceptions. Obviously, we've talked about oilseed rape, and if you go across Salisbury Plain, you know, at the right time of year, that you almost have to put your dark glasses on. From horizon to horizon, you've got bright yellow. And then up in August, up on the moors, up on Exmoor and for us and Dartmoor and what have you, the heather is out. And if the heather is yielding well, then you know, you can get some lovely honey. Heather honey is beautiful honey, and they always say the rule of thumb is in any 3-year period it will yield really well on one of the 3 years and not necessarily on the other 2. So it's just a matter of being lucky and getting up there. And you may well have heard about Manuka honey, which comes from New Zealand, and honey itself has very good wound healing properties, and for a very long time, it's been a traditional wound dressing. But what and certainly in the First World War, because of our blockade of Germany, it was almost the only wound dressing that they had in Germany, and it's very, very effective. And I'll say a little bit more why in a moment. But what became apparent was that the Manuka honey in New Zealand seemed to have enhanced healing capacity, particularly, and they were using it on really intransigent wounds that they just couldn't get to heal. And so a considerable following has built up. And it can be extremely expensive, and it grows in the backcountry of New Zealand, and it's almost like a weed. It's very, very mile after mile of it. It's in the tea tree family, Manuka, and our Food Standards Agency declared a few years ago doesn't have greater powers, healing powers, than other honeys that are in England, that are actually in native honeys. That they were saying that some of the claims for it were overstated, and the FSA was saying that this quantity, 1,700 metric tons of Manuka honey were produced worldwide, and 1,800 tons, so that's more than the whole world production, was sold in UK alone each year. And worldwide, 10,000 tons are sold every year, even though there's only about a quarter of that, rather less, is actually produced. But there's a terrific cash bonus to that label. Even in your doggy shampoo or your horse. And it's even got added mango. I think marketing is a wonderful thing. And you can buy this great container of it, 5 litres, for 35 quid. And so, there's huge markups associated with Manuka. One of the things about all honeys, why it's such an effective wound dressing, is, believe it or not, there's a significant but small amount of hydrogen peroxide in it. And when hydrogen peroxide meets proteins, it breaks down into water and oxygen. And the oxygen is very useful in wounds because a lot of the nasty bacteria actually are anaerobic. They're the ones that do best in sort of dirty wounds where there isn't a lot of oxygen. So liberating a whole load of oxygen into the wound really helps to break down some of the really nasty anaerobic bacteria, which give rise to some of the really nasty infections. So, so although it's got, hydrogen peroxide in it, don't think if you have a shampoo of with honey, you're necessarily going to turn into a saucy peroxide blonde. You're not, but it is one of the reasons why all honeys are very good as wound dressings. One of the things that's becoming fashionable now is raw honey, and this is honey which when it's extracted and what have you, that it's processed as little as possible, and importantly, it isn't warmed or heated in any way. And this is suggested that therefore it's much chemically, its integrity isn't affected. And certainly, as I think we've mentioned before, if honey is heated, you'd get various other chemicals which are present and can be measured. One is hydroxymethylfurfural, and that is a marker for honey that's been heated or is very old. And obviously the other thing which is very popular is organic products. But again, in our country, just because of the way we farm and what have you, to actually achieve organic certainty of something like honey, because the bees travel, a distance of miles, is very difficult to achieve, and be, little bit wary about making claims for your honey that you can't actually substantiate. And there's always lots of concerns about honeys that have been adulterated these days. And what's nice about producing our own honeys is that we know exactly how it's produced. We don't, do all these things. We're not there to make money, but an awful lot of imported honeys are actually adulterated with sucrose, sugar syrups, and also particularly certain countries, particularly like China, they're heavily laced with insecticides and pesticides. And on several occasions recently, the big supermarkets have had to withdraw honeys from their shelves just because tests showed that they were so contaminated. And this is one of the great joys of producing your own honey, that you actually know that, this isn't something that you're doing. And vegans now obviously are a bit, they don't think beekeepers are nice people at all. They think that, we're unkind and we, take advantage of our bees. And they're quick to tell us very often that we do things that we don't necessarily do, like put sugar in our honey. And they have produced their own product made from brown rice syrup, which is 3 different sugars. I don't think I've ever tried it. Although rice syrup, which obviously, as you would expect, is produced a lot in Southeast Asia. There's a lot of it is produced from China. And the Chinese use rice syrup to adulterate their honey a lot. And the significance of that is that the tests, the forensic tests for whether, honeys are adulterated, there aren't easy tests for picking up rice syrup, whereas if it's sucrose, there are very good and easy tests, and so it's much more difficult to pick it up in these honeys that are coming in from abroad. So honey production. So we've got our sucrose, our nectar's coming in, and our old friend invertase, the enzyme, and it's added during collection so it can start working, and then also by the house bees. And so that disaccharide sucrose breaks down into 2 simpler sugars, fructose and glucose. Whoops, sorry. Yep, sorry about that. For some reason, it's very slightly reluctant to move on every now and again. So the moisture content might be up to 80%, and it's got to be reduced down. The reason is that if it's left at 80%, it's so dilute that yeast could actually ferment in the honey, and also that obviously it could deteriorate. And so it's important to get that water level down, and we've talked about it. And you've got to have plenty of space to allow that evaporation to take place. We've talked about the fanning and the fact how they can suck up the nectar and strop out their tongues, giving it a wide surface area, and try and evaporate this water down. Then when it is down, it's sealed over with a wax cap. And for the bees, it means that, you know, it's ready for the winter. And if you're going to take some honey off, it means it's ready to go. So here's one of our frames from out of one of our supers, and you can see it's really completely sealed, all of it. We know all that honey is down to less than 20%. If you wanted to check, you can, there's a little gizmo you can buy quite cheaply these days, called a refractometer, and you can take a little smear of honey and put it on the platform on the refractometer, and it will give you a printout of the water content. They used to be several £100 not that many years ago, and wonders of modern technology, they're now down to about 20 quid on eBay. So you've got your super, let's say, of honey here, and this schematically you think, great, I'm going to take off some honey. So obviously down the bottom you've got the brood box where the queen is and all the brood. Then you've got your queen excluder there. So that's stopping her getting up into the upper box, so that you haven't got a jumbled mix of honey and brood. That's your super box. It's got the frames in, and you probably remember it's called a super because it's above the queen excluder, and the super is just the Latin word for above. And so any box which is above the queen excluder is a super, but we tend to use these shallower boxes because they weigh about 28 to 30 pounds when they've actually got full of honey. So what you've got to do is, what you don't want to do is is to take off your super box and it's absolutely full of bees, full of exasperated bees. And so what you want to do is to put something underneath it, which is if you like, a one-way gate. The bees can go down to the brood box, but they can't come up. And so you call that a clearer board, and it's fitted with some bee escapes, which you're going to see in a moment. And so you may have several supers on here, but we're just showing one for the moment, and it's all going on above the queen excluder. And in this particular case, we would put the clearer board in there. Obviously, if you've got several boxes, you might put it somewhere else, but in this case, you would put it in there. And if we have a look, you probably remember when we've seen before a clearer board, it has some holes in the top, and you can fit these little bee escapes in. These were designed by Mr. Porter, and you virtually always now plastic, and there's a hole in the middle, and the bee can go down there, and it walks out here, and you can see underneath. You're going to see it more in a minute. There are these little soft springs, and the bee pushes against them, and it goes through there, comes out here, and the springs close behind it, and it can't go back. So that means that you know that at least one bee has now gone. And so just to make it clearer, here's a pull to bee escape, and we just slid the top back, so you can see these quite soft little metal springs. And we're looking from the underneath now. So if you imagine we're looking from underneath, and you can see that the bee is going to come out here. it's going to be under the clearer board, so it's no longer going to be able to go back up into those frames. And obviously down below here, you've got the queen, the queen substance, the pheromones she's given off, and the bees are quite eager to go back and see mum. So very often you can clear a super perhaps in 24, 36 hours. There is always going to be a few bees who somehow don't seem to get the idea of it. And so you always seem to end up with half a dozen slightly perplexed bees hanging about in the super, but at least you haven't got 5,000 exasperated bees in your box in the back of your car when you take it off home to extract it. So here's the upper side of your clearer board. So they're going to go down through that hole, through the springs and out the way. And believe it or not, you know, very often you can clear a super of all the bees, and perhaps there were several thousands up there in 24, perhaps 36 hours. Now, there are lots of different types of these clearer boards. This is a one actually I prefer to use, although I do use the others. And here that you've got a hole here and a hole there. And this is just a gauze, which allows, if you like, all the scents and what have you come up from below, but they can't get through that either from above or below. And so they go down there, and they end up, we've turned it over now, so they've come through and they get walked down these tubes which are gradually narrowing, and they come out here and they walk out here, and they find it comparatively difficult to learn to go back and go the other way. What they tend to do is go over to that gauze, and if they think, oh, I'd quite like to go back up there, but they can't get through. And these rapid clearers, again, you know, you might well find in 24 or 36 hours that you can clear a complete super. So we showed you that, and there are other types. They get all sorts of names. These are called rhombuses or rhomboids sometimes, and it's the same again. They come through the hole and they walk out to the perimeter, and they come out here, and they just don't tend to learn that you can go back that way and go back. And so there are all sorts of ones that you'll see, but it's a way of emptying out all the bees from that particular module of the hive. Obviously, what you've got to make certain is that the bees can't get into that box in any other way. And obviously, if you've got nice modern equipment, then that's not likely to happen. If you bought rather battered old equipment, you know, there may be odd holes or broken corners, and you do need to stuff something in there. I use sort of put a brown parcel tape all round if I have any doubts, because of course otherwise the bees will get terribly excited. They will just go in this little entrance which exists, and they will clear out all the honey and take it down into the brood nest, and you go proudly to take off your super, and you think, oh, that's incredibly light, and it is, because it's got no honey in it, because the bees have taken it down. And the trouble is, it isn't necessarily the bees from the colony that has produced the honey. Loads and loads of robber bees will come from other colonies, and it creates mayhem and robbing in the apiary. So, you know, you really don't want that to happen. So they stay there approximately that sort of time in most cases, and then you've got a box which is virtually empty of bees. You've got to, you know, as I say, except there will be the odd one that's in there. There's always got one or two that's got a bit of an attitude problem and just don't get the system. When it comes to extraction, obviously the whole process has got to be done in a clean and hygienic environment. You can do it in your own kitchen, but you know, it's got to be done under hygienic circumstances. And certainly, you know, if you're going to sell some honey, you know, the food standards people have a right to come and inspect your extracting system. and to pass comments. In the old days, you know, there was old extractors might have been made out of galvanized iron or goodness knows what. But these days, all your equipment must be stainless steel or food grade plastic. You know, that is, you know, these are legal requirements. If you're going to sell honey, these are legal requirements. They're not optional extras. So, you know, if you've done a do-it-yourself extractor in a dustbin, it's not going to be well received by the food hygiene department. And this is a fairly typical extractor that you would buy, and most of you will find you know that this year obviously we've got lots of people from lots of different divisions in Somerset, and I think you'll probably find that the vast majority of divisions have their own extractor that they will let you have, you know, on a short-term loan. They may ask you just to pay a small fee, and certainly those of us who are from the Somerton division, you know, we have our own extractors and equipment, because otherwise, you know, you could spend a lot of money. And I get very excited about extraction. I'm a retired dentist, and I get overexcited every time the subject is drawn up. And when we have extraction sessions, I make some rather creaky old jokes, and people get rather anxious when I talk about forceps and all sorts of things. So you'll have to bear with me if we're able to run our extraction session later in the year. You'll have to pander to some of my rather foolish jokes. So you remember, our honey is beautifully capped, and that you want to remove those cappings. Now that wax you're going to take off is lovely pure wax. It's the best wax that you're going to get, and you want to collect it for later use. You can have great fun making beeswax candles. Every year I have great fun with my 6 grandchildren when we all make beeswax candles together, and you know, for Christmas presents and things. And you can have great fun with the wax from the cappings. You use an uncapping knife. I mean, what we will try and show you when we talk about extracting when you're able to come out to our sessions, that you know, most of you will have an appropriate knife that you could use. It's got to be food grade plastic, and it's got to be stainless steel. But you know, you don't have necessarily to spend vast amounts of money when you start out by, you know, using divisional equipment and utilizing things that you've got in the house. So we'll just watch this guy. He's got a rather smart uncapping knife. As I say, your cappings are something you want to keep and look after. Left a little bit up at the top there. There we go, and you do the other side exactly the same. You can use a hot air gun. I don't personally, because you know, you end up sort of shriveling up all the cappings, and in a sense you lose them. And I don't like heating my honey because of this worry about hydroxymethyl furfural. Oh, sorry.
Go backwards.
I've got to go backwards, sorry.
Okay.
Here's our man with the hot air gun.
Sticky, I suppose, isn't it?
Oh, going again. Sorry about that. Obviously, we and you can use an uncapping fork. It's rather fun.
A lot of people think that to use an uncapping fork, they actually scratch the comb. But you can see when I do that, I leave little bits of wax behind. The proper way is to go underneath the cappings with a fork like this and lift them off. That way you get the wax off the frame so it doesn't end up in your honey. And you just keep on working your way down the frame.
And then you need to have the use of an extractor. And there are two main types of extractors. And one is a tangential one. And here you see these screens are at the side here. And they're almost sort of parallel to the sides. And you put your frame, you can see one here in here like this. And so you put in 4. And then you're able to rotate it. And because of centrifugal force, the honey on the side closest to the wall gets forced out, and then you have to turn it round and do the other side. Although for safety reasons, what you tend to have to do is do about half of the first side, then turn it round, and you can do all of the other side, and then go back and do the rest of the first side. Because if you really get it up to speed on the first side, you've got this terrific weight of honey on the second side, which can literally smash through the wax and break the comb. So it's really just knowing the word, a tangential extractor. And as I say, the one that's preferred is a radial.
It goes into the honey extractor. It goes into the honey extractor with the top bar facing out. And now we will continue this with another 8 frames.
So they go in like the spokes of a wheel.
Once we can, it's now time to close the lid and a little bit of elbow grease and start extracting. What we do is we start the rotation nice and slow and steady.
And you can, as I say, have motorized honey extractor. I got a bit decadent when I retired and bought myself a motorized one. Not that I didn't rather enjoy whirring away madly, but I just thought it might be a good investment for my old age. But you know, a manual one is just as good and just as much fun. And for the amount that you're going to use it, it's absolutely fine. But there is this ugly matter of cost, and they can be, you know, pretty expensive. But as we've said before, I think you'll find that most divisions will have their own one, which you will be able to borrow. So, you know, if you really get into it, you can spend a lot of money. But all I can say for Somerton is that we loan ours out, but we do just make a charge of £2 a day. The reason not to make money from our members, but that the difficulty is that everybody wants it at exactly the same time of year. And it's just a way of hurrying up people to get it back so that the next person can have it. What you don't want is someone saying, oh, you know, I managed to do the extracting just before I was going on holiday, didn't have time to get it back, and so I had to fly off to Benidorm, and didn't get back for 3 weeks, and everybody else has been waiting for 3 weeks. So that's, for us, is what the £2 is all about. Then you have got to filter it. Obviously you don't want bits of dead bees and bits and pieces floating around in it.
This is a honey filter. We have a 300 micron fine stainless steel mesh filter on this side, and a 1000 micron honey filter on this side. It's a double stage filter, so the honey goes through the top stage and opening up the honey tap. Nice clear honey going straight into the filter. This is a honey filter. We have a 300 micron fine stainless steel mesh filter on this side. This is a...
There we are. Sorry, so we had to move on. Not sure why I'm having trouble with one or two of the videos. And once you've extracted the honey, traditionally you put it into a stainless steel settling time or ripening. There is not really ripening going on, but what you do want to do, because it's been spun, there's lots and lots of air bubbles, and you really want it to settle. And at the bottom, you've got a tap. And so what you can do is pop it in. I actually, put mine in our boiler room, which is gently warm. Don't heat my honey in any way, but it's gently warm. And this helps with it flowing when we actually then jar up the honey. So it's all great fun. So is our extracting. The frames rotate in the extractor. You've got those two different types, the radial and the tangential. The honey is removed by centrifugal force. I think sometimes physicists want to tell us it should be called centripetal force, but there we go. You then strain it to get out odd bits and bobs of stray wax, propolis and bees' legs. And or you can use a straining cloth. I mean, I use a straining cloth and it's down to 200 microns. So, that's pretty small. And you might just need to gently warm it, but I personally try and avoid that. You don't want to be creating HMF. It's something which can be monitored, and it shows either the honey has been heated, or as it ages, the levels tend to increase. So you're in your settling tank, and you just let the air bubbles rise to the top. Again, I tend to leave it to about 24, 36 hours. And then I like to put it straight into bottles. If you've got a lot of honey, you can put it into bigger containers called honey buckets. Very often they take 28 pounds, but I personally prefer to get it bottled straight away. And then you've got these empty supers. They're sticky and nice and terribly attractive to the bees. And in the evening, because you don't want to get them absolutely in a state of heightened excitement, you put your supers back on to the hive that they came from. You do it in the evening, and if you put it above the crown board, the bees perceive it as something outside of their community, and they rush up and they clean out what remains of the honey, the stickiness, and take it down into the hive for their winter stores. So after a few days, you can lift it off. They're very, very light, perfectly clean, and they can be safely stored over the winter. Got to keep them, not well clear of vermin. Otherwise, things like mice and rats will eat all your lovely wax, which is something which you really don't want to happen. And you can do other things that you can grow your honey, sell it in these are called sections. And in the old days, in Victorian times, the vast majority of honey prior to extractors was sold like this. And again, it's an upmarket product, and you can sell your honey at a premium. Or something I like doing, although largely for when we have our honey show, is producing chunk honey, which you'll see in a moment. And you can see you have a jar of honey with a great big luscious chunk of comb in it. And, you know, people find that very, very attractive when it goes on their toast. So you can choose your jar size, and they can be hexagonal, which looks nice for honey because of the honeycomb, or they can be round. And what we do in Somerton is we buy in bulk, and you know, we buy them by the pallet, and by that way we get them much cheaper, and we then pass that benefit on to our members who buy. And you know, it's just a way of making the whole process a bit cheaper. And you really should be using new jars and lids. They are clean and sterile. For sale, reusing jars is discouraged, and you know, if you were challenged, you could be in difficulty. There is legislation which makes provision for people who literally use closed systems. If you imagine your milkman, he delivers milk in your milk bottle, you take the bottle, rinse it out, put it on your doorstep, he takes it away, it's commercially cleaned, and then, you know, they put milk back in it and it goes round, you know, dozens of times before eventually it gets broken or chipped or what have you. And so there is some provision if you're literally running a closed system, perhaps you're mainly selling to family and friends, where perhaps you could reuse your jars. But if you're selling through shops, you know, you really should be using new jars and lids every time. And as I say, we want to let the honey settle, get those air bubbles out, preferably in the settling tank before it goes in the jars. If it does crystallize, you can gently warm it so that it becomes liquid again, and you can actually put it into the jars. Or don't put it in a microwave. You know, that really does heat it up very swiftly. And you've got to fill the jars to the correct weight. Theoretically, if you overfill a jar, you're as much fault as someone who is underselling. Although I think most of the food weights and measures people do accept that, you know, although it is technically just as wrong, that it's perverse because you're giving people something free. You really don't want foreign bodies in it, and that's why we're using these, you know, these microns, 200 micron screens. But I must admit, when I went into the environmental health people and they talked about certain foreign bodies that have been found in honey, they were surprisingly relaxed about it. You know, I was sort of hair rising in the back of my neck. But they say, oh, well, we'd go and talk to them and we'd look at their processes and tell them how they've got to change. Whereas I thought they would be much more punitive. Yeah, so you do really want to have a tidy product. You do have legal obligations about labeling, and I would say it's important to use anti-tamper labels that, you know, it does then show if someone has, you know, perhaps in a shop has is up to mischief and has opened it, and you might even have put something in. So, you know, an anti-tamper label, this thing here, is a really good thing. And you do have legal obligations about labeling. So, and if you want to have a really racy read, you can read these. I'm not quite sure how things are going to change because of Brexit, but I think the reality is that probably to all intents and purposes, for our purposes, they won't. And if you want a good resume in the Thorns catalogue, which you've only got to request, they have got a good précis of the legal requirements. This is one of Stu's homemade labels. Obviously, if you go to the big companies who produce the labels, you pay a bit more, but obviously they're professionals producing professional labels, and you can be certain that they fulfill your legal requirements. You've got to put in that it's the country in which it's produced. You can put in some nice graphics. You've got to put in metric the exact weight. This is the equivalent of a pound. You may put on a pound, but the metric has to be more dominant, visually more dominant. It has to be in a larger font size, and that is a legal requirement. So the metric has to be the dominant thing. You've got to have your name and address on. You've got to be thoroughly traceable. It's you can't just put Smith Norwich. That doesn't fulfill your legal requirements. So this is Stuart, and obviously he lives at Ditchett, and it goes right down to the postcode. So you've got to be absolutely clear who you are and where you are, so that it's traceable. On here you have a best before date, and that you has a time. So obviously the 12th of 2024, say, and you can put that 2 or 3 years ahead. I mean, obviously in the case of honey, it's bacteriostatic, if not bactericidal. The food hygiene people and the food standards people aren't worried about honey as a product. If we were producing soft cheese or something and they're worried about listeria, they'd be chasing us a lot harder. But we produce a really nice product, and they're not terribly worried about people like us. And you have to have a lot number on it, and usually it should start with L and a number. The reason for that is, if they did find Granny's false teeth in a jar of your honey, they would have to withdraw the whole of that lot from sale. So all that lot of honey should have the same lot number, and that would enable all these jars to be identified in the same batch, and they could all be withdrawn from sale. One way of getting around this is actually putting the lot number for every jar of honey sequentially. So the first jar is number 1, the second jar is number 2, the third jar is number 3, and you will find that that this will be offered by some of the big producers. So we'll look at some pretty labels, and you can think, well, have they actually fulfilled their requirements? And obviously they've got the metric, and they got the pound. It's the metrics in a bigger font, but have they got the address? They got a phone number, but they haven't got the address, and they don't clearly state produce of the UK, which they might get away with what they put, but they haven't got their address, and so they could very easily be challenged on this. And obviously they haven't got a lot number, and so this is a product that perhaps would be queried if it was for sale in a shop, and the food standards people had it drawn to their attention. Now, this is a one that you can sort of buy something like this from the big producers. It says Sussex honey. It does say produce of the UK, and it's got on it that it's 454 grams, which is a pound. It hasn't got on, you know, the mention of a pound. But that's not wrong. That's not illegal. What it's got to have on is that it's 454 in grams, and you know, the company who did it would print your name here, and you've then got to think of, you know, what about a lot number, you know, best before, what have you. So you do have to get this right. Now here's someone, a home produced one, and I mean it's pretty purest ivy honey. I mean, as you say, as we've said before, monocultures of honey are difficult to achieve. Whether they could prove it's pure ivy honey, ivy does produce honey very late in the year, so it might be possible. And if we have a look here, obviously they haven't got the weight in 454. They've only got 1 pound, and then it says eat before December and this date. They haven't got produced in England. They've used made. Perhaps you get away with it, but obviously, you know, you can't see a lot number, so they are in danger, I would think. And they've got this extraordinary strap line, which says, well, you can read it, when first packed. So it's not many products that actually say, buy my product and put it in a cool, dark place for a couple of years before opening. So, you know, that does invite comment, doesn't it? So your granulated honey. So all pure honey will gradually become crystalline. But if you just warm it gently, it will actually go back into, you know, a liquid. Please don't use a microwave. And I'm not sure if you realize that honey should not be fed to infants under 12 months. The reason for this, there is a condition which is very rare called infantile botulism. And Clostridium botulinum is a bacteria which lives in the soil, and it produces spores. And if, because of poor practice, you know, there is earth and dirt goes on it gets picked up on your supers and what have you, been putting them on the ground. In theory, it is possible for the spores to get into the honey, and the infants, they fail to thrive. And it's very difficult to spot because obviously, you know, children, a small number of children fail to thrive for a variety of causes, and working out that it's because of this is very difficult. And I think, you know, I tried to look up exactly the number of cases, but I think from something like 1977, I could only find 12 cases. So it is very rare, but honey should not be fed to infants. So other hive products. We talked about pollen. You go into your health food shop, there's a good chance they'll have pollen in there. Propolis, you can make it into a tincture. Lots of people in the old days particularly like to use it for sore throats and what have you. And you can use it as a wound dressing, because as I say, the propolis has various antibacterial activities. You can do lovely things with beeswax, producing candles, something I thoroughly enjoy doing. You can actually sell, if you're doing this commercially, raw jelly, and it goes into beauty products. I hate to think, well, I shouldn't be cynical, but it sells at huge prices, but whether it will make you even more beautiful than you are already by using it, I don't know. And fun enough, bee venom is used. I'm not suggesting that you would produce it, but there is a certain market in, I think, in used for alternative medicine for things like rheumatoid arthritis. So here's a, and also you can go into your moisturizing cream if you're feeling particularly venomous. And you can even enhance your male fertility by using raw jelly. So, you know, if, and of course, you can produce bees. Lots of you are thinking, oh, how do I start? And we say, well, you can buy a nucleus, a small colony of, say, 5 frames of bees with a new queen. And, you know, some people will make more money by doing just that than producing honey. And here's one of our BBK module exams questions. So 5 products of the hive other than honey and beeswax. So after your 6 courses, you're well on the way to start taking module exams. So our last quick topic is we're just going to talk a little bit about getting the bees ready for winter. We've got to make sure that bees have enough stores to keep them until the spring. They probably need 40 pounds of stores to take them through the winter. And we talked about fondant a little bit earlier on. And obviously, when I first started nearly 50 years ago, feeding fondant was people got a bit snooty. Their attitude was, well, if you've made sure that the bees have got plenty of food in the autumn, you'd fed them sugar syrup then, and the stores had gone into the colony, there shouldn't be any need to feed fondant. And you remember we talked about fondant earlier, but over the years we do tend to use more fondant, but you can make up a sugar syrup. It's very thick, and obviously if you need to supplement your bees to get them through the winter, that you can do that. And each hive needs the equivalent of 40 pounds of stores. That's 40 pounds of honey, or 20 pounds of honey, and 20 pounds, let's say, of sugar syrup stored. So perhaps you might feel if they were really short of stores, they might need 3 gallons of syrup. And in the autumn, it's a good time to treat for varroa. So that's something you'd probably do as well. You should really finish your feeding by the end of September. And it gives the bees plenty of time to get the water content in the stores nice and low. And you never quite know when it's going to turn really cold. The feeders you could use if you were going to, this is a rapid feeder, you could see in the middle there's a little plastic cone, and the bees can get up in there, and you fill this little container with sugar syrup. And the graphic will show this is what the bees can do and feed it. You have to be terribly careful when you're feeding your bees. Bees show a remarkable kamikaze attitude to life. They love to drown themselves in their syrup. So, you know, you always have to make sure that they can't just hurl themselves in and drown. This is a contact feeder. If you imagine this, if you put it on its base, you fill it up, and then you make sure the lid is well on. And then when you're certain the lid is well on, you make sure again, because every now and again you'll forget to do it really well, and the lid will come off. You then tip it over so that the galls here is at the bottom, and you put it over the feed hole, one of the feed holes there, and the bees will come up from underneath and suck the syrup from there. It doesn't all run out because you create a Torricellian vacuum so long as you have filled this absolutely full to the brim. Then these are different bigger feeders here. This is we just show you this just so as you've got a rough idea. The bees come up the side, and again, here it comes. And this is the syrup if you're having to feed your bees, and they can drink the syrup without hurling themselves in and drowning. So other winter precautions. You want to make sure your hive's in good condition, waterproof, and the roof is safe against winter winds. You know, you put a big block on the top. In the old days, in particular, when you had solid floors, whereas these days, you know, we have these ventilated floors, these mesh floors, which allow the mites to drop through. You tilted the hive forward slightly, so if there's any condensation or water in there, it actually ran out. And you want adequate ventilation because, funny enough, bees will handle the cold very well, but they don't like being wet and soggy. They really don't like it. And on the front of it, you fit mouse guards. And that, as the name suggests, is to keep mice out, because otherwise the bees are in a tight cluster. It's perhaps very, very cold. They're all cuddled up together. Mice can get in. They'll build a nest in there. They'll eat the comb. The bees can't throw them out because they're in a tight cluster. And the mice cause absolute havoc and, you know, cause total chaos. And you put some wire netting loosely around the hive because the green woodpeckers love in the winter to drill holes in the side of the hive. And when there's snow on the ground, you can just put a board up the front. The bees aren't going to be flying at the moment because it's too cold. They're in a cluster, and it just stops the snow building up here and completely blocking the entrance and you know, reducing the ventilation. So we're going to sum up. We've talked about bee forage, some communication, our forage plants, extracting, our winter preparations, and hopefully before too long, Boris permitting, we will be able to run some practical sessions for the Summerton division, and I imagine the other divisions will be running practical sessions for their members at all. It looks like it might be towards the end of May if we're lucky, but certainly we are very hopeful that once we can legally do it, that we will spring into action and we will have a lot of fun. We will help you try and find bees. We'll try and find a mentor for you. You must remember, we're all volunteers, but we are all only an email or a phone call away. And this is some of our last practical group. I think I mentioned during the course that we'd put in our order for BBware, and this was a group of us, and they came that day to collect their brand new bee suits. And we had a request from a professional photographer. He wanted to take pictures of us, and we were backlit. There were lights behind, but you can't see. And this picture appeared not only in the Times, but also in the Guardian. I think the following day. I can't guarantee that you're going to end up in the quality newspapers this year, but that's what happened a couple of years ago, and I personally really like that picture. So, questions?
We've got a couple, Joe, but before that, I wanted, if we could just have a couple of parish notices. Is that okay?
Yes, of course. You go ahead, Stu.
Okay. I have recorded all the sessions, including this one, and several people who've not made certain sessions have asked if I could send the video to them, which I've done. But as I'm recording this one, I've put the previous 5 ones up on YouTube now, and I'll put this one up on YouTube as well. So I'll send everybody the links to all 6 sessions, so that there's no need for me to send you individually the recordings. You can just go to the YouTube hyperlink and find it for yourself, okay? And you can download one or all of them, whichever you like, okay? That was that. Sorry, and nucleus colonies. Do you want to say anything about that, Joe? Or
We'll just go through the
Right. Well, I'll just answer that as you've raised it, and then we've got a number of questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just these things before the questions because people have been asking.
I mean, obviously, if you feel that the route for you may well be that you'd like to start with a nucleus, then Stu is collecting a list, well, 2 lists really, of people who are producing nuclei and also people who want them. And so if you'd like to say to Stu, yes, this is what I'd like to do, he'll take your name and address and or your email, and obviously the magic moment will come when he'll hopefully he can put you in contact with someone.
Okay, and lastly from me, before we get into the questions, with the bee suit orders, if you'd all like to go, if you need a bee suit, anybody, go to the BBware website, just Google BBware, and have a look at the colors, the sizes and all that sort of thing, and let me know as quickly as you can if you do want a suit. That gives me more leverage with BBware, and I can go back to them and say we need 40 suits or 50 suits. Can you do anything better on the discount? So if you can do that as quickly as possible. But all these things will be in the newsletter, but I just wanted to mention them first, okay? Right.
But BBware is the letter B, where, all one word, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Not BEE, no.
It's all on the back. I think it's on the notes for session 3 or 4 anyway, the website address. Right, questions. We've got...
Stuart, can I just say...
Yeah, sorry, Lionel.
Sorry, can I just follow on from what you just said? I'm talking now to the Southeast members. As regards bee suits, we'll join in with Stuart with those and try and get a big order if you want them. If you want to borrow a suit, and you don't want to buy it yet, we've got plenty of suits you can borrow. But if you want to buy a suit, go to Stuart. But anything else, as Joe was saying, if you want to buy bees, or we will try and find a mentor. We'll have apiary meetings as soon as possible, all like that. We will do that as Joe was explaining for Somerton. Southeast will do the same thing. But as regards to suits, if you just go to Stuart if you want to order them, and then we will arrange to get them delivered to here and make it easier if you were to pick them up from here. Okay, thanks very much, Stuart.
Cheers, Lionel. Okay, I think you've got the questions, Chris, have you?
Yeah, we have.
Okay, can I take that?
What? Just read them.
No, hang on. Some of them are helpful comments. Is that Stu mentioned that the Sheffield Beekeepers website, that they've got a very good pollen chart, and Caroline has just mentioned that she's just had a look at it, and it was very interesting. So others of you might well like to have a look. And what's quite nice is that you know, although certain colours, you know, are commonplace, you can actually learn reasonably well about certain of the pollens your bees are bringing in. And Norbert mentioned, so if your car is covered with a sticky substance while parked under a tree, it's probably being produced by aphids rather than the tree, and that is absolutely right. And people do get miserable about going under lime trees and ending up a bit sticky, but learn to love lime trees, particularly the small leaf lime. They are a brilliant producer of nectar. And, you know, if you want to do something useful in life, plant some lime trees. And Paul has pointed out, that Paul Harper, that yes, the Central Division does have extractors for the use of its members, as I think probably most of the divisions do. Right. Martha says, when you say sterile, do you mean that you have to sterilize the jars? Yes, usually what you do is you put them into, you know, a hot oven, and that's the standard that's required. Obviously, when you buy jars, they've come in a cardboard box, probably from China. You don't know if rats have been weeing on them in ship's holds or what. And so you would be expected to thoroughly wash them either by hand or put them through a full wash cycle of your dishwasher. And then you do actually heat the jars, you know, let them cool down again afterwards, obviously, in your oven, just to sterilize them. Right, so, and Lisa says, do you leave honey for your bees to feed on over the winter? Yes, I think most of us, it's difficult to say categorically yes or no, but the vast majority of us leave honey for the bees, but top it up to the necessary level. I mean, if you're, you know, trying to make a living out of this, perhaps you've got to be a bit more draconian and take off far more honey. And if, you know, you feel, well, my beekeeping has to pay for itself, again, you might feel I've got to take off more of the honey because, you know, I've got to balance my books. And when I'm starting, you know, there are lots of costs going out. But broadly speaking, you know, you are topping up the bees to make certain that they've got enough. And as we've made various references to fondant, if at this time of year you're worried that your bees are getting low in weight, and you can check the weight just by lifting the back of the hive, it's called hefting, then you can put this sticky fondant, which you can buy, on the top, and they come up and take it down. And it's a way of preventing them from starving to death. As Paul said, there are some people now who overwinter their bees largely on fondant, and that's fine. That's just personal choice. There isn't, in a sense, a right answer to this question, but personally, you know, I just, if necessary, top up the honey to 40 odd pounds of stores, and just keep an eye on them. And if I'm getting a bit anxious and uneasy that the weight's down, I can always put some fondant on. So, so let me just say, I just want to go back a moment. So Lisa, do you feel that answers your question? Shocked into silence. I'll take that as a yes. Right. So Andrew said, if you take your one super off to extract the honey, what do the bees do with their nectar while there is no super on? It's a good question, but obviously there will be some space in the brood box, particularly where it's not unlikely that the most likely time of year that you're taking honey off is, you know, in the autumn. So in the short term, there will be space in the brood box. And obviously it may well be that your hive had 3 supers on, and they're, you know, 2.5 of them are full of honey. And so, you know, that they've, you have left them with some space. And as I say, you do your extracting and you put them back on to actually clean up. So Andrew, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So sorry, I just got to take down the next one. And Andrew was, well, I think I've just answered that question. So it said, what do you do with the frames after the honey is removed? Are they reused? Well, yes, what you normally do, as I say, is put them back on to get out the rest of the honey, and the bees can utilize that. And when they're dry and clean, you might then store them over the winter make certain that it's free from rodents, that, you know, mice can't get in and gnaw the combs, and you cold store them, and then they're ready for the next year. And because producing wax is a very intensive activity for bees, you know, your drawn comb, your existing frames are one of the most valuable things you've got, because it means if you can then put it back on that hive in the spring, they haven't got to draw all that wax out. Okay, so does that answer that as Michelle? Yeah.
There was one about set and runny honey, Joe. Somebody asked, what's the difference? And
hang on.
yeah, basically the difference is where the bees have been feeding for honey, for nectar, but also all honey will crystallize eventually or set, but you can artificially set it by seeding it with already set honey if you want to. Some people prefer runny, some prefer set. And you can make soft sets.
I'm just taking the questions and comments in the order they arrived.
Right. So
but,
yeah.
So yes, you know, all runny honey will eventually end up as granulated, and if you do need to warm it gently, it will go back to runny. If you need to, say, put it into jars or something, or just like runny honey, you know. So Mike Sandys is saying, when our nucleus is likely to be available to help planning equipment, etc. Stu, would you like to answer that?
Well, yeah, we've actually got several people who have more hives than they want, and so what they'll do is they will split their hives and produce smaller colonies or nucleus colonies, and we have one person in Cheddar who's got or will have probably 4 for sale, one person in Stokes-upon-Hamden who will have about the same amount, and people are producing them all the time. They'll be getting in touch with me and letting me know what colonies they've got. And in answer to Mike's question, yes, about May, because that's when bees naturally reproduce anyway. So if anybody would like to buy a nucleus colony locally, or have a swarm, which is slightly more difficult to deal with, then just email me and let me know. Several people have done so already. Okay. One other thing I forgot earlier, Joe, sorry. If anybody is looking for somewhere to keep bees, because they can't keep them at home, I have offers of 2 sites, one in Barton St David and one in an orchard with 250 apple trees in it, and one in a vineyard. They've freshly taken over the vineyard and they want to add to their green credentials, and they want beehives on the site. So if anybody would be interested in either of those, that one is closer to home. It's quite close to Ditchett here, so that's worth bearing in mind, that one and the Barton St David one. Sorry, Joe, back to you.
Okie dokes. And Terry was saying, I'm living in Cheddar, will I get to come over to Somerton? Well, it's all to do with Boris, I think, Terry, but the thing is, I think we suggest when we talked before, that you've got a bee buddy, and there are some very, you know, good beekeepers in the area. I think we mentioned Bridget Knutson, spelt K-N-U-T. We can give you our contact details. So it does make sense for you to make local contacts. But having said that, you know, it's not that we don't want to see you in Somerton, but we think it might be to your advantage to make local contacts. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, if I could have the contact details, that would be great.
Yeah, okay.
I'll email them to you, Terry.
Right. And right, I've got my suit and equipment and hives. I'm ready for bees, except for practical sessions. When would bees be expected to be available? I think Stu has answered that. I think if we've worked on May, as a rough rule of thumb, you never know, there might be the odd swarm coming about before then. but I think May would be a sensible thing to say, wouldn't it, Stu?
Yeah, it varies year on year. Last year, the first swarm appeared on April the 7th. So you just never can tell. It's down to the weather and, temperature and how much rain we've got and all that sort of thing, and how the bees are built up in the spring. Very warm spring last year. We've yet to see what this one's going to turn out like.
So Jackie's mentioned that if any of you fancy it, most of the major suppliers, certainly Thorns, which as you probably know is a major supplier, do actually produce a pocket size pollen guide, which costs I think about £1, and it's got the main pollen colours for the most likely ones that you're likely to come across. As I say, it's slightly irritating because there's an awful lot of greys and beiges, and you think, am I absolutely certain what that is? But it is a very nice little thing, the pollen guide, and if you can, cover it with something so it doesn't get sticky and keep it with your beekeeping equipment, it's nice to have. Right, so, and Tom White, do you group by any other equipment, hives for example? Funnily enough, Tom, we tend not to. In the past, what's tended to happen is that, annually there's been this very good second-hand auction in March. And this has run for years. It's run by the Taunton beekeepers. They do a very good job of it. And it's been a really sort of excellent source of equipment. What we do is, if our members want to sell equipment, they can put an advert for virtually no cost, usually actually in the newsletter, as a way of meeting up. But that there are sort of odd hives coming available at the moment, and so I don't know if you do Facebook, but on the Somerset Beekeepers Facebook page, there have been several people who've commented about selling hives, so it might well be worth just keeping an eye on that. It's interesting anyway. Interesting people are saying interesting things. So does that answer your question?
Joe?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Okay, Tom, great. Eric. So you're mute, Eric. Eric, you're mute.
Am I on mute?
You're audible now.
Oh, fine. We may have some surplus equipment at the apiary, the divisional apiary, which we may well be able to sell on in the next sort of month or two. But we do need to sit down and work out what we need at the apiary and what we can move on. But there may be some bargains for people, should they wish them.
I saw it. It was like an electric current being put through a lot of people when they heard the word bargain. It was a galvanizing experience for them.
In the past, we've sold stuff on at about 1/3 of the cost of new equipment, yeah. which clearly is a bargain. But we have to wait and see what we have. But I can say we have an uncapping tray there, which normally would sell for about 300 quid. And we can probably move that on for about 100 or thereabouts, should people want one.
Yeah, so really what we're saying is that, at the Somerton division, we may well have some equipment. It's difficult to predict exactly what it's going to be yet. But obviously, all those of you who are Somerton members that will get the Somerton newsletter, and it almost certainly, I would have thought, will go out in that. But if you wanted to let Stu know that you were particularly keen source equipment, you know, a hive, say, it would be helpful for us to have that list really of exactly what it is you are looking for, and because we actually try very hard to get the people and the right equipment to meet somewhere in the middle.
It does come up all the time, doesn't it, Joe? I mean, we had a call back in, I think it was August of last year, 83-year-old beekeeper giving up, and he was giving away 5 colonies of bees and the hives. So and that was giving away. So some real bargains do come up occasionally, but we can't promise when they're going to come. That's the trouble.
Yeah, that's what you want is absolutely certainty, and of course that's not something with that sort of thing that we can guarantee. But you know, we will do our best to to steer you in the right direction. If you could let us know what it is that actually you need, and obviously those who are in other divisions, it is worth your while to contact, make contacts within your division, because you may well find that someone's giving up or moving away, or granddad can't do it anymore, and when he moved there was his hive still in the barn, all these sorts of situations that you meet up with. So it's really is worthwhile building up links locally, because you may well find to your surprise that there's someone saying, oh well, I've got one in the barn, I've meant to been keeping bees for years, but I haven't. So you could have that.
Yeah,
so
I actually saw a hive today. I drove into a little mini industrial estate, and there was a house at the entrance, and as I was driving out, the back of their garden was open-ended onto this industrial estate, and there was a national hive sitting at the back of this garden on the floor, nothing in it at all. I mean, if anybody's prepared to drive a little distance, go and have a look and knock on the door, I'm sure you could buy that one. But it's in Willerton, down the other side of Bridgewater, so it's a bit of a way away. But if anybody wants the details, I'll certainly let you know.
So don't be shy. Do try and make local contacts. No one's going to be people aren't going to be offended if you ring them up or contact them and say, oh look, do you have any ideas how I might be able to find my first hive? And I mean, perhaps they may not, but you may strike gold. So it's well worth making local contacts wherever you are, and obviously we will try and help all we can as well. Right, I think we've run out of questions. You're all numb. You've fallen back exhausted.
I've got a question for Stuart.
Hello, Anne. Yeah.
It's Anne. Stuart, I've got my allotment up at Lights Carey.
Oh, right.
And there's the hives at the back. What was the name of the gentleman that's overall? It's Keith somebody, isn't it?
Keith Sturgis.
Keith Sturgis,
yeah.
Thank you.
Do you want his contact details?
Yes, please.
Just one sec. And the Bishop of Podimore keeps his bees there as well.
I know it's a RAF pilot, retired, isn't he?
He was, yeah, helicopter pilot.
Yeah. Yes. Bishop of...
He lives in Cape Mandeville.
Which is
and
near
his telephone number is not in the book. Right, that's good. Let's try another one. I've got loads of these. So.
Because I'm new, I've just thoroughly enjoyed the course. I would like to get all the equipment, and if I was going to email you tomorrow to say if any second-hand equipment can be sourced, and I'll buy new of what I can't.
Yeah.
But I need to ask him, speak to him first to make sure I can put my hive there.
Number will be 014.
Whose number are you after, Stuart? Stuart, whose number are you after?
It's Keith Sturgis. 01458.
He's in the book. Yeah.
01458 223
Yes.
759.
759. Yeah.
I was looking in an old book, Eric.
Fair enough.
They've just
They're always the best.
They've just let one of the allotments that came up, and there's a huge lavender bush and rosemary on there, and they've been told they mustn't pull them up because it just gets covered in bees.
Right.
Lovely.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Stuart. So I'll email you tomorrow with that bee suit and any equipment.
Do you need John Webb? John Webb does it with Keith Sturgis. I know we jokingly call him the Bishop of Podimar. Do you need his number? Do you need his number as well?
John who?
Webb.
John Webb.
John Webb.
Yes. Yes, please.
Have you got his number to hand, Eric? I haven't got my book in front of me. I could go down.
Yes, it's 01935.
Yes.
841.
Yes.
465.
Thank you very much.
And he has his bees at Lights Carey.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. How far are you from Ilchester, Annie?
Pardon? Oh, I live in Somerton.
Oh, right. Okay. It's just that somebody in Ilchester who keeps the bees at the Buffalo Farm just outside of Ilchester is looking for somebody to help her, but she will mentor them all through the summer, and then probably give them a colony of bees at the end of the summer.
Right. Yes, so I'm only a few miles, as I'm in Somerton. It's not far to Ilchester, or just a bit further than going through Kingston to the allotments.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So there's all sorts of possibilities coming up.
Yes. Thank you.
But definitely, Stu, in the last few days, there were people saying they'd got equipment available on the Facebook page, weren't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do go on to Somerset Beekeepers Facebook page and look back through the posts and chip in there and say, oh, yeah, what you got, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, don't be afraid to say I'm just starting. I'm as keen as mustard.
I'll be very honest.
I'm as rich as anything. Sell me your hive, you know.
Well, I'm living in an almshouse, so I should probably ask them to give it to me.
Oh, well, good. We'll say I'm in an almshouse, you know.
Somebody just said that they contacted the relevant people but didn't get a reply. I don't know whether that's to do with equipment or bees or what, but if you'd like to clarify that, then we'll try and sort that one out for you.
Sandra Calvert.
Hi, yeah, no, what it was is it was via David. There was someone on the Facebook saying that they've got a friend that's got hives and that available coming up. And they luckily did send me their friend's phone number, and I rang, but I haven't had any answers, that's all. I rang a couple of times. I've now left them my number. So obviously I don't know whether they're still interested or I'm just not lucky with the phone time.
Well, good luck.
Sorry about our cat keeps walking in front.
He's beautiful.
Don't apologise. Don't apologise. I love cats.
All right.
So
I'm even quite fond of Joe.
Well, I know, but you're a very tolerant man, Eric.
I'll keep trying, but if not, I shall contact you, Stuart, anyway.
Okay,
to try and
Sandra, that's fine.
something this year. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, you can always put a post of your own on Somerton Beekeepers and say, looking for national hives or whatever you're looking for, and see if anyone then responds to you.
I do it on
Right,
Somerset and Somerton.
Yeah, both.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Don't be shy.
And even if you you're on one of these local Facebook community pages, nothing to do with beekeeping, it can't do any harm because, you just don't know what there is out there.
I'll stick it all over Ilton then.
Absolutely. You can't go wrong that way.
Sandra, that was David Millard, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Yeah. I keep trying. He's a nice guy, David, really.
David it was his friends that are doing it, so he gave me their number. So obviously I have messaged David tonight and just said I don't know if they're not interested anymore, or and sorry I haven't got my face on, but I'm a mess and I'm doing a lot of tidying while I'm listening. It'd be a horrific sight.
Don't
talking to a blank
apologise.
screen.
Look at the three of us, Eric, me and Joe. I mean, we're no pictures, are we, any of us? But...
Nah. Takes 3 of us to make 2 good ones.
Is that including the cat?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she's the best bit.
Furthermore, about hives and things for sale, on Facebook, on their marketplace, just recently, people are selling bits and pieces of hives. It might be worth a look. I look just in case it's any of these stolen hives that have been happening in the past.
There's been 2 instances, haven't there?
Oh, has there been a second one?
Yeah, there was one in Cheshire and there was one in London, I think.
Oh, right.
There's also after the talk by Thomas Seeley, there was a chap at the breakaway saying he'd lost all 4 of his hives and electrical equipment, but I can't remember where he was from.
There were people from all over the globe on that one, weren't there?
Well, if it's Tom Seeley, he would be from the USA.
It wasn't actually Tom Seeley, it was someone else that had been listening to the programme.
Oh, right. It does happen, but it's not very common. But what we would all say is to mark your hives so they can be traced if they are stolen.
You can buy a branding iron.
Yeah, I mean, I have a branding iron, and so you can brand your hive and anything else of yours, and anybody else who gets in the way. But do
you worry about this, Chris?
Well, no, it was actually a present to Joe from my father, I think, wasn't it?
It's why
when we
she
got
has.
Married.
Yes, it's why she knows what I'm going to say.
Don't you dare.
Yes, and funny enough, I gave my son-in-law when my daughter got married, and she's actually listening in on the call. So, branding irons are wonderful things.
The best thing you can stamp on there, if you don't want people to know your name, just put your postcode on there. Brand your postcode on.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. And only slight thing is if you're someone who periodically moves with their job.
But at least it gets it back there.
Yeah, I mean, theft of hives is a problem, but it's not. To be honest, it's not a huge one.
I think the reason we're so aware of it is that it is comparatively rare, and therefore when it does occur, and it is very upsetting for the owners. You get to be very sentimental about your bees and affectionate. I mean, I know it's a bit absurd when they're insects and they might well sting you, but you do build up a very strong bond with them, and therefore it's very upsetting when your bees are stolen. I mean, I've had bees now for nearly 50 years and have never had anything stolen, but when it is stolen, and because we've got a good network within beekeeping, you hear about it, because it goes down the grapevine. So it's not a big problem, but it's very sort of unpleasant when it happens to you.
And I think the other issue is that if someone is stealing bees, they are probably beekeepers, and we like to think, that we don't do that sort of thing.
Yeah, because if you know how to do it, it's incredibly simple to pick up a hive and move it.
Oh, a toddle. I mean,
in fact, on Friday mornings, Stu and I are going to be moving his hives because he's got to have his new workshop built.
Yeah.
And
congratulations.
Yeah, Monday morning they're coming. Only 7 months. Yeah, how are we doing? Right, we've have you got any more questions, Joe?
No, we've got no more questions. Lots of people saying nice things, and we're
Yes,
glad
indeed.
that you've enjoyed it. We always thoroughly enjoy doing the course, and it's a little bit strange doing it on Zoom, whereas, you know, when we can meet when we meet in a group, you know, it is easier in a way. But I think it's you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and all I would say is don't be afraid to keep in touch, and you know, if you need help, do feel you can contact us, or obviously Lionel if you're in one of the different divisions. But we are always here, and that there are no silly questions. You know, if there's something that you want to ask, it's not a silly question. I mean, for us, because we've been doing it, some of us, for a long time, it's part of our DNA. But you know, we're only too pleased to help. That's what we're here for. And you know, hopefully you'll go on and have as much fun from bees as we do.